Hello, fiends, friends, and familiars. This is once again Matt Orozco from Macabre Daily. And you might think that Chad and I are just hanging out all the time because we're once again joined by writer and producer, director Chad Ferrin to talk about his latest film, Ed Kemper. So, Chad, thank you so much for coming back.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It is. And like I was just telling you, I hope, touch wood, you keep chumping out movies this fast because we get to keep talking about them. And it's always such a delight to hear from you, but also see the work you're doing. So, for those that are, wondering why we're talking about Ed Kemper, it's going to be coming out from Dread Presents theatrically on April 4th. And then if you can't get to the theaters, you have a chance to go see it on demand on the 8th. So, Chad, I'm going to dive right into it.
Sure.
What do you think makes Kemper's story compelling to you?
Well, to me, it was kind of, the mother-son aspect kind of really intrigued me because, I had issues with my mother. So it was kind of, pulling those things that I can relate to the script that Stephen wrote, which he wrote a great script. And it was one of those things when I first got it, I was like, this is something that could be really amazing. And, I just got to work kind of adding more of the mother aspect and also whittling down the I knew how much money we had to spend and what we could do and what we couldn't do and try to make it meet in the middle of what artistically and financially could be a good film. And I hope we we achieved that.
Yeah, that's always the balance, isn't it? The kind of the artist intention and the amount of money you have to spend on that. So,
Right, and getting the period correct and all these details that to me were important because I know that there was a Kemper film done, I think in the mid 2000s, that was just
yeah, early.
a pile of junk. They didn't even
Yeah.
try to do the period. They didn't try to do the height. They didn't try to do all these things that were, the key to getting Ed Kemper right, and I tried to, keep just get the details right and the specifics of what happened and the period, and hopefully we succeeded in a small degree.
It's funny you mentioned the authenticity of the time period because I was watching like one of the kitchen scenes with Ed and his mom, and there's a Cornados box, and I'm like, God, that's a great name for a cereal. And I looked it up, like that was a cereal. Okay, wow. So
Yes.
there is like these little things that are just kind of they draw your attention to them, and it's the cars, the decor of the house. I mean, that looked like my grandma's house
Oh, that's
uh,
great.
to a T. So yeah, I think you nailed it on the production and the period design.
Good.
Now, when you and Steven Johnston were kind of working on the script, I know you mentioned he kind of put something together. I think you had a hand in giving some notes and fleshing out the motherly side of things. How did you decide on what to focus on, but also what to omit? Because we know so much about serial killers now than we did before. So how do you pick what are the things that are going to tell the best story?
Well, again, it came down to Mike Muscal, a producer I knew, contacted me on Facebook, and he's kind of like, "Hey, you're cranking out a lot of movies. How are you doing it?" And I said, a little bit of money and a little bit of time, and you just, if you make it work. And I had just finished Pig Killer, my first true crime foray, and he said, "Are you interested in doing any other true crime? Because I've got a script for Ed Kemper, written by Stephen Johnson." And I'm like, Stephen Johnson, the guy that did, Hillside Strangler,
Right.
Bundy, and, Ed Gein. And I'm like, hell yeah, send it over. And he sent it over, and the script was amazing. And I'm like, okay, I can offer you nothing really, and we'll make it, in 10 days on, 100 grand. Are you interested? And he's like, yeah, well, let's do it. So I bought the script, and then I, again went through it to kind of hone it to the budget we had and the time we had, and make it work. And it was kind of getting those details of what. Then I started diving into interviews with the actual Ed Kemper and reading up on him, and the script was 90% everything that happened, and
Wow.
so it was really easy just kind of interjecting things, more of the aspect with his mother and getting those elements, because it just made more sense to have that aspect fully detailed, just time wise and budget constraints,
Right.
and really get into that dynamic. And then, doing as much as we can with the killings and that aspect of it. But, it's just kind of finding what the amount of money you have and the time to make something as good as you possibly can. and look as big as you possibly can. So it was kind of fleshing out the limitations within the script, adding details that weren't in the script, and just kind of bringing them together and hoping for the best. And I think, I'm very proud of it. And, the cast, the crew were amazing. And it was just, one of those things, again, attention to detail, the box of cereal, the little things, the car, all those things that you can get for a limited amount of money and making it look that period.
Yeah.
Because if you get the period and the clothing and all those things right, yeah, that's half the battle. And it was really the wardrobe department did an amazing job. Camera department, I mean, everything was on part, and it started with Steven's script, which was really a top-notch script, and the story is, compelling as all hell. I mean, six
Yeah.
foot nine guy with 140 IQ, killing co-eds is is interesting shit.
Yeah, and not really and not really understanding that what he's doing is he knows it's wrong, but he's not connected to the emotional side of it. And
Right.
I think so many more people know about serial killers now because of like Mindhunter and like, the
Sure.
exposure that true crime has gotten. And I think Kemper's story is, somewhat sympathetic in a way. Obviously he did some very awful things, but you see the way that his mother treated him. And Susan Praver, by the way, wow, chef's kiss on that. She is downright rotten. I'm gonna send her an email and be like, wow, can't wait to see you in Dorothea because that was rough. Especially the scene when she's up against the wall, kind of banging on his door, and
Oh
she's in her
yeah.
lingerie, just completely drunk. I mean, yeah,
No,
it
it
was
was one of those things. It was one of those things right before I had not seen the wardrobe for that or anything or how she was going to do it. It was basically the first take. I'm sitting behind the camera. She comes out and rolls into that, and I was like, okay, she's got this,
yes. Oh
and
my
she was
God.
so good. And it just I knew right then. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put her in Dorothea, and it's gonna work. It was one of those things where you may have worked with an actor before, but there's certain things, and they're good and they're this and they're that, but that solidified it for me that she was just brought her A game, and she was fantastic throughout.
Totally. When I spoke with her for the Beyond the Wall of Sleep, she dived right into that English accent like it was nothing,
Right.
and so I was just so impressed by the ability to, flip on a dime. And then again, comparing her doctor character to the
Sure.
mother here, it's just polar opposites of a human being. And you could see how someone like Kemper could be pushed to their limit by constantly being berated by such an overbearing mother. Um,
Well, and I think that's the thing, of the abuse starting at a young age with him and leading up into his adult, and it's all those, a storm of things that happen that, I'm not going to lay the whole blame on the mother or any of that stuff. It's just a number of things that happen to these people that caused them to do what they did. And his case is interesting because he's one of the few serial killers that comes out and says, "Yeah, I did it," and
yeah,
and he talks about it and he goes into great lengths of detail throughout the years of these things. Whereas some serial killers are still denying they did it or not really getting into the nuts and bolts of it. And for him to admit it and not only do the thing that's one of the most interesting and helping the FBI and other
yeah.
criminologists and things like that. It's an interesting character.
He is, yeah, and especially consider I just watched a movie that Unearthed Films put out called Evelenko with Malcolm McDowell playing they changed his name, but I think it's like Andre Chicalito or something like that is his real
Right.
name. But basically a guy who like supposedly, he was convicted of 33 eating and murdering women and children as a communist. But like he's one of those guys who they were able to he was caught for 33 of them, but if you listen to him, he's like, oh, I did way more than that, so it's like it's hard to know, like, again, some of these delusions these guys live in. I think that you're right. Kemper is such a unique person because of his awareness of his situation.
Right.
And also, again, his contributions to the FBI led them to start to profile that someone with a history of abuse, who has an overbearing kind of and also often like sexualized relationship with the parental figure leads to this kind of behavior, which makes us wonder. A lot of us who've been through some shit are like this close to snapping,
Right.
So
Right. Right.
it's scary stuff, but it also kind of brings you down to the earth a little bit. And I know you're this isn't your first true crime exploration. You did Pig Killer with Robert Picton. Got this one, Dorothea. Um, what do you think beyond just Kempter's story kind of intrigues you broadly about the true crime space?
Well, I think, for me, a lot of it is, the I love the time periods.
Mm,
You can go back to the 70s and the 60s, and that to me is an exciting thing because, growing up with, you know, uh, whether it's television or whether it's one of you see these different time periods, and you're like, oh man, I wish I lived in those time periods.
right.
And being able to try to recreate those and kind of get into that mindset of, everyone was, driving cool cars and they were going to cool play. It was one of those things where you appreciate the past more than the present for me. So it's kind of fun to be able to go back in time in a sense and work on those, even though it's a dark subject matter and whatever. But you find positive elements within the darkness that you
Yeah.
enjoy personally, whether it be cars, clothing, films, or whatever it is, and kind of interjecting that within this story. And okay, we're shooting this scene in the car today, and I love the car, the smell of the car, the gasoline, all these things that personally I find cool, weaving them into this story. And then when the actors are reading these words and they're coming to life, and you're just like you're for a moment in 1973. And it's kind of, to me, it's really fascinating and exciting way to be able to, for a limited amount of money, make something and personally be transported back into a time. And it's really cool. It's all I can say. And I enjoy
Oh,
the idea. The same thing with Dorothea. It was going from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and then even into the 90s with her. And it was again, if you, in getting cast and crew, and especially like wardrobe, when they come to you with stuff that's vintage and whatever, and they're putting it in the actor, and you see it, and you're like, this is amazing. And
yeah.
it's one of the most fun aspects for me. Is same thing with doing a sci-fi film or whatever. You're kind of just in a whole different world or a different era, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, and it kind of speaks to the fact that we all grow up watching the past, right? Like the movies we tend to grow up with
Sure.
aren't necessarily current movies, they're older movies, and that informs kind of what our, in such an impressionable age, that like that becomes what we gravitate towards. So that's why so many folks my age, in the 80s go back to those 80s horror movies because that for them is like that was the catnip when you were a kid. It's just like, give me all of that.
Right. Right.
And that's why we're seeing the 90s resurgence. All the Gen Z kids have like now like, oh, they got their kicks on Scream, and now we're seeing that come back. So
Totally.
um, now I know last time we spoke, you mentioned that on occasion your films have been censored. Was there anything you had to cut for Kemper to for release?
Yes. Well, that's the funny thing of this was probably the first film, and the same thing with Dorothea, where they bought it before I was even done with it. They basically, Epic Pictures saw the rough cut. They really liked the rough cut. They bought the film, and within our contract, it was basically they had approval of the cut, which is fine because I then said, well, then no matter what, I get to release my director's cut
Right.
on Blu-ray and DVD and whatever physical media with you or without you. So you can either approve that version and release it, and if you don't, then I can take it to someone else and release it, a year later onto a Blu-ray, which would be the director's cut. And they agreed to that, and so the I stand by their cut. It's fine. It's a good film, but I do have my approved version that I get to release later on, whether it's through them or through someone else. So that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, I'm excited about that because I know you did the same with Pig Killer, and I remember picking up I think it was Vinegar Syndrome. I think we talked about who did
Sure.
it, or one of their partner labels.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll be looking forward to the Ed Kemper director's cut. That's for sure. Um,
It's one of those things where, and the same thing with Dorothea. They wanted 10 minutes cut out of that, and it's fine. I don't. It's one of those things where you make a compromise as long as you are able to, release your version. I think it's kind of a neat thing to have a couple versions out there, and it's a different film in a sense, and that's kind of fun.
no, it is. I mean, especially as film fans, we enjoy seeing how Blade Runner is probably the most obvious example of like what
Sure.
happens when multiple cuts exist, and then you get to kind of choose like which is the one I like most. Nightbreed had a similar thing where there's at least
Sure.
three cuts out there floating around that we know about. So
Right.
it's exciting, and I think no matter how cuts are made, as long as there is ability for the director's vision to get out there somehow. And I really liked your approach you talked about last time of having that clause in your agreements where, hey, if you're not going to put it on physical, I'd like to, and I want my cut to be the one. because again, fans just eat that stuff up. We want to see the vision, even if we like prefer something else. We still
Sure.
want to see how it was meant to be seen.
No, and for me, it's you're getting into a partnership with a company or whatever it is, and you want the film to do well, but at the same time, you artistically want to be satisfied. So it was kind of
Yeah,
a meeting in the middle for me, and it's better than having them go recut their own version, and then that's what they put out, and I've never seen it. At least I made the cuts, I made the choices, I took their notes, I did that, and that's their version. I stand behind it, but I also am able to stand behind my own version. And people love it or hate it. At least they're like, oh well, at least we have the option, like you said,
right.
of finding which one we like better and going with it.
Well, I was watching an interview with Terry Gilliam yesterday. He was talking about a movie Delicatessen that he put his
Yeah,
name on. And he talked about how, it's similar to you're saying about how you want your ability to put your cut out there. So in his case, they were shelving Brazil and he took out that big old ad in Variety to Sid Sheinberg and said,
right, right.
when are you going to let my movie out, Sid? And so I think
Yeah,
there is this emboldenedness and autonomy now to kind of release your films as you intend. And I'm glad that you figured out a way to do that because I think it offers, again, for us, ability to see, one version, but also kind of how it's intended to be seen, which often is, I think, what we tend to want more of.
sure.
Um, and when it comes to working with Epic and the Dread Presents label in total, how's it been working? I know they spot this kind of not sight unseen, so to speak, but rough cut. But
Yeah.
as far as the back end support for releases like these, how have they been as far as getting the word out and supporting you creatively?
Oh, they've been great. I mean, I'm actually pretty impressed. Not to take anything away from other distributors I've worked with,
Sure.
but they've been when it comes to promotion and stuff. They lined up. I think I've got like 8 interviews today, and they're every day they're shouting out on social media with different little teasers and clips and things like that. They got a little theatrical for us. I mean, they've really gotten behind it, and I'm excited to see how it all proceeds, and hopefully it finds an audience, and they dig it.
I think they will. I mean, again, true crime is it's very much en vogue at the moment, and I think Kemper's a story, as you said before, it really hasn't been told beyond either listening to actual interviews and kind of historical record or the glimpses we got in the Mindhunter television show. So I'm
Sure.
very confident that folks are going to enjoy this, and at the same time, cannot wait to see Dorothea because again, Susan's performance in this just made, and again to give some shouts to Brandon Kirk as well. He really went all out there, and I think his aloof but brutal
Right.
persona really shines through. So just a reminder to everyone, that Ed Kemper will be out in theaters. So if you can go out to check it in theaters on April 4th, please go and do so. Support the film, support independent films if you can. But at the same time, you can also rent it on VOD. Money is green no matter how you spend it. But Chad, I just want to say thank you again for your time as always. And can't wait to talk to you about Dorothea.
Sounds good. Thanks,
All
my
right.
friend.
All right.